The day I bought the girl, the sky was weeping dust. Stonebrush wasn't much of a town, just 2 rows of low buildings hunched along the trail like shoulders braced against wind. I rode in for flour, linseed oil, and maybe a moment's silence that didn't remind me of the graves out back. I wasn't looking for anything more than a dry bunk and a clean bottle. The past 6 months had stripped me bare. First the boy, then May. Fever took them both like they were never mine to begin with. I tied my gelding outside Marcy's and stepped into the saloon. It was early yet, but already warm with pipe smoke and men who drank like their lives depended on it. I didn't mean to linger, but the rain was coming, gray and sudden, and I figured I'd ride home dry if I waited an hour. That's when I saw her. She sat in the corner near the stove, back straight, hands folded, eyes flat. Not the kind of flat that came from dullness. No, this was the look of someone who had burned every last feeling and was still left alive. She couldn't have been more than 15, though something in her posture made her look older. Like time had pulled hard on her bones. The man standing beside her, skinny, with yellow teeth and a traveler's coat stained from collar to hem, was speaking loud enough to be heard over the card game. "She don't talk none," he announced. "Ain't touched my food in 2 days, but she can clean. Lord, she can clean. Cooks a bit too. I got no use for her now that I'm headed north. Thought one of you fine gents might." A few laughs cracked the room open. Someone muttered, "Put her back on the train, fella." But the man pressed on. "No takers? Well, I'll part with her for $2. Hell, even one." The girl didn't flinch, didn't blink. I didn't think, I just stood. "What's her name?" I asked. He turned, surprised someone was taking him serious. "Cora Lee. Least that's what her aunt called her. Ain't said a word since the fire." I walked over, took out $2 from my coat, laid them on the counter beside a half-empty glass of rye. "You said 2. The man scooped up the money. "She's yours then. Good luck." I looked at her, still seated. "Come on," I said, gentle but firm. She didn't move right away, just looked up at me with those unreadable eyes. Then, slow as a clock on its last spring, she stood and followed. No one stopped us. A few heads turned. One man snorted, but said nothing. I helped her up onto the horse behind me. She didn't speak, didn't hold on, just sat straight, arms in her lap, as we rode back into the hills. The trail to Dry Willow was long and narrow, cutting through red dirt and mesquite. The rain came soft at first, then steady, blurring the world into streaks of ochre and silver. We didn't talk, not that I expected to. The quiet felt thick between us like fog in the lungs. She didn't shiver, though the cold would have bitten straight through skin. I offered her my coat. She took it without a word. "You don't owe me anything," I said after a while. "You stay, you'll help out, you'll eat. That's all." Still nothing. When we got to the ranch, the wind had picked up. The house stood dark and patient against the gray sky. One main room, a lean-to stable, and a porch where May used to hang her rosemary to dry. I helped her down, let her inside. The fire had gone cold, so I set to work rekindling it while she stood near the door, dripping and still. "There's a cot by the wall," I said. "Clean enough. You'll want dry clothes. I'll find you something." Upstairs, May's old trunk still held some of her lighter dresses. I didn't think twice, just laid one over the railing and went back to the fire. By nightfall, she'd changed, eaten half a biscuit, and curled up on the cot like a stray that hadn't decided whether to stay. I poured myself a drink and watched the flames lean into the chimney. I didn't ask what happened to her. Didn't press. You can smell ruin on folks, and hers hung close. Whatever story she carried, it had come in its own time, if ever. I woke before dawn, same as always. The sun hadn't yet split the ridge when I stepped outside to feed the chickens and check the water trough. She was already there, kneeling in the dirt. She scooped water into the trough with a dented bucket. Her sleeves were rolled to the elbow, and her hair, now dry, was braided tight. She moved quick, efficient, like someone used to work. I watched a moment, then nodded and got to the rest of the chores. That afternoon, she swept out the barn without being asked, fixed a loose hinge on the coop, scrubbed the kitchen basin until it shone. Still no words, but she wasn't empty. That much I knew now. After supper, I found her staring out the window at the hills, knees drawn up to her chest. I placed a notebook and pencil on the table behind her. Didn't say a thing. Just walked out to the porch and lit my pipe. If she had something to say, she'd say it her way. Night came on like a thick curtain. Stars blinked into being. The wind carried a cold promise down from the pass. I sat out there long after the fire inside died down, listening to the wind creak the shutters and the horses shift in their pens. Behind me, I heard no footsteps, no pages turning, just the sound of someone breathing quietly in a house that had been too still for too long. The girl hadn't spoken, but in some way I couldn't yet name, the silence had changed. Not gone, but shared. And that, I thought, was a start. By the end of that first week, it was clear Lee didn't plan on leaving. She moved through the house like a shadow that had decided it might as well belong somewhere. Quiet, alert, deliberate in everything she did. She still hadn't spoken a single word, but I'd stopped expecting one. Words were like horses. You couldn't force them where they didn't want to go. Dry willow began to change with her in it. I'd left the place to rot in the months after May passed. Let the corral fence split, the porch sag, the garden choke itself with weeds. But now, each day that Cora scrubbed a floorboard or raked a path clear, I felt a kind of guilt settle over me. She worked like someone trying to prove she deserved to be alive. I figured the least I could do was meet her halfway. So I put my hands to use again. Repaired the roof over the smokehouse. Painted the trim around the barn. Hung new shutters on the west windows where the sun bled in cruelest. She never praised the work or even looked too long at what I did, but she noticed. I saw it in the way her brow softened as she swept the porch beneath the new awning, or how she lingered an extra second to touch the smooth, sanded doorframe before going in. One morning, as I saddled the horse for a trip into town, she walked out from the hen house with a carton of eggs and held it out to me. So, her fingers gestured, simple and clear. I nodded, taking the carton. "You sure?" I asked. She didn't answer with words, just tucked her hair behind her ear and went back to the coop. Stonebrush hadn't changed. The same two dogs sprawled under the mercantile porch. Same stink of dust and iron in the air. But the eyes that watched me now were different, wary, sharper. They weren't looking at me like they had when May was alive. They were weighing me against something I couldn't see. As I tied the horse outside Milner's, I heard a voice behind me. "You said 10 up a boarding house now, Harlan." It was Judd Marlowe, older than me by 10 years, with a temper like sour milk and half as much sense. He owned the north pasture, big enough to think he ran the town, small enough to stay bitter about it. "She's working," I said flatly, not turning around. Funny sort of work. A mute girl with no kin and a man who lives like a ghost. "What's that spell to you?" I faced him then. "It spells none of your business." He grinned without mirth. "We'll see what Reverend Price thinks about that." He walked off before I could say more, spurs jangling on packed earth. I kept my trip brief. Sold the eggs, bought nails, and didn't linger. On the ride back, a slow knot tightened in my gut. Rumors had their own wind out here, and once they started blowing, it didn't much matter where the truth lay. That evening, after supper, I found Cora sitting on the back steps with a notebook in her lap. She hadn't written in it since I gave it to her. I sat beside her, slow and careful. She looked up, eyes flicking to mine, then down again. After a long pause, she turned the notebook toward me. On the page was a drawing, charcoal, rough but clear. A house on fire. A man standing outside, backlit by flames, holding something heavy in one arm. A child, maybe. I didn't speak, didn't blink. Just let the picture settle inside me like a stone. She tore the page out and let it fall between us. Then she got up and went inside. I left it there. Let the wind take it if it wanted. But it didn't. The page stayed curled on the step until the moon rose over the barn. The next few days passed without incident. We worked side by side, her silence no longer feeling like absence. It was just part of the rhythm. The land doesn't speak either, and yet it gives what it can if you treat it right. But I could feel a pressure building in the valley, like something waiting to creak its hinge open. It came one morning in the form of a knock. I opened the door to find Reverend Gideon Price standing on my porch, hat in hand, eyes scanning the house behind me. "Boone," he said, "could I have a word?" I let him in, offered coffee. He declined. He looked around the cabin, at the swept floor, the folded linens. the notebook left open on the table. "I've heard some talk," he said finally, "about a girl living out here. Quiet one. Taken in by you." I nodded. "Cora Lee. She works harder than any man I've hired. She doesn't speak? Not with her mouth." He frowned, fingers twisting the brim of his hat. "There's concern, Boone, about her age, about how she came to be here. I paid $2 to get her away from a drunk who wanted to sell her like livestock," I said. "I didn't ask for a girl. Just saw someone needed out. That's all." He studied me a long while. "It may not be enough to say your hands are clean." "I'm not claiming they are," I said. "But they're not dirty, Reverend." He nodded once, slow. "May I meet her?" I stepped to the back door and called her name, just once. A moment later, she appeared, dressed in her work clothes, face calm but watchful. She stood in the doorway like she'd known this was coming. The Reverend offered her a smile. "Hello, Miss Lee." She didn't respond, just gave a small nod. He tried again. "Do you like it here?" She held his gaze, then walked to the table, picked up the notebook, and wrote something quick. She handed it to him. He read the page, blinked, then looked at me. "It says, 'I stay because I choose to.' That's all there is to it," I said. He looked at her again. She didn't flinch. When he left, he said nothing more than goodbye. But I could tell he was thinking. So was I. The next morning, as I fed the horses, I caught Cora watching me from the loft window. For the first time, she smiled. Just barely, then vanished from sight. It wasn't much, but it was something worth protecting. The trouble came 3 weeks later, riding up the ridge like a storm you could smell before you saw it. I was digging fence posts down near the east paddock when I heard hooves, 4, maybe 5 riders coming fast. Not the casual kind of pace that says someone's passing through, but the clipped rhythm of men who'd already decided where they were going and why. I wiped the sweat from my brow and walked toward the gate. Cora must have seen them too. She stood just inside the barn doors, pitchfork in hand, her body tense as a bowstring. Judd Marlowe led the pack, reins tight, mouth drawn in that smug way that made you want to hit him even before he spoke. "Harlan," he said, pretending to tip his hat, "we're here on a matter of decency." I crossed my arms. "You rode 5 deep for decency?" A couple of the others, local boys with loud mouths and little else, shifted in their saddles. One carried a rolled-up paper, official-looking. The others just watched me like they were waiting for the moment to turn ugly. "Go ahead," I said. "Say what you came to say." Judd gestured toward the house. "We got affidavits from townsfolk. Statements saying a girl's been held out here without family, education, or moral supervision. Reverend Price signed off on a recommendation for review." "Price came here himself," I said. "He saw her. She showed him in her own hand she chose to stay." Judd smirked. "That ain't the law. You can't just keep a girl like a stray dog 'cause she don't bite." One of the others stepped forward, unrolling the document. "County decree. Temporary ward of state. She'll be taken to Oak Hollow Orphan House till a proper placement is made." "She's not going anywhere," I said flatly. "She ain't yours, Harlan," Judd snapped. "You ain't her kin." "No," I said, voice low, "but I'm the one who saw her when the rest of you turned your backs." He made a motion like he was going to dismount, but then paused. "Don't be stupid. It's the law." From behind me, I heard the soft scrape of boots on dirt. Cora stepped out from the barn, eyes clear, her hands empty. She didn't flinch as they turned to look. One of the younger men, the tall one, barely past 20, lowered his gaze when she met it, like he'd expected a ghost and got something worse. "I speak now," she said. Just 3 words, dry as gravel. Everyone froze. Judd blinked. "What?" Cora stepped closer. "I speak now," she said again. "You don't get to take me." Then she walked over to the paper, took it from the rider's hand, and calmly tore it in 2. Judd's mouth worked, but no sound came out. His face flushed a deep red, and I saw his hand move to the grip of his rifle. That was enough for me. I took a step forward. "You pull iron on my land, you better mean it." The others weren't so sure anymore. Whatever they'd expected, a broken girl, a frightened man, they hadn't found it here. The spell had cracked. Judd saw it too. His moment was slipping. "This ain't over," he spat. "No," I said. "It's just beginning." They turned and rode out. Not fast, but with less swagger than they came in with. Judd looked back once, and I could see it in his face, He didn't like being shown up. That kind of man always comes back when he's got something heavier in his saddlebag. That night, I sat on the porch, shotgun across my lap. Cora sat beside me, sketching by lantern light. She didn't say much, not that she had to. Her words that day had done enough to last a while. "You were brave," I said finally. She nodded, but didn't look up. Didn't feel brave. No one ever does. Not when it counts. A few stars blinked above the ridge. The wind carried the scent of sage and distant rain. For the first time, I felt the shape of a future I hadn't dared picture in months. Not because it was clear, but because it was shared. 2 days passed. We rebuilt the fence and repaired the trough the riders had knocked over on their way out. Cora baked biscuits from memory, something May used to do, and set them on the table like it had always been her place. Then late one evening, a wagon rolled into the yard. Not Judd, not county men, just Reverend Price, alone, his hat in his lap. I stepped out to meet him. "I heard what happened," he said quietly. "You signed off on it." "I did. I thought it was right." He looked past me, toward the barn where the chickens rustled in straw. "Now I don't." I said nothing. She spoke. She did. He looked down at his hands. "I came to apologize. Not for what I did, can't undo that, but for not seeing it sooner. She don't belong in no orphanage. She belongs where she's building something." I nodded once. That's all we ever wanted. He reached into the seat beside him and handed me a folded paper. "Official revocation. County won't be back. She's your ward now, by name and seal." He drove off without waiting for thanks. Inside, I handed Cora the paper. She read it slow, then folded it and slid it into the notebook. She didn't smile, but she looked up at me, and for the first time, there was peace in her eyes. That night, before the lamps dimmed, she left a new drawing on the table. It was the ranch, our ranch, quiet beneath a wide sky, 2 figures on the porch, side by side, neither of them alone. I stared at it for a long while, then turned down the lamp. Tomorrow, we'd plant new seeds. The weeks that followed settled into something close to peace. Not the kind that comes easy, but the kind you earn one chore at a time. Cora took to managing the ledgers like she was born to it. I'd never taught her, but she had a mind sharp enough to learn just by watching. She sorted feed orders, counted coin, and kept the books straighter than I ever had. She'd scrawl little notes in the margins, short, clear, efficient. Not a single word wasted. Like her. One morning, I found her out by the pasture, coaxing one of the new colts with a bit of sugar and hum low in her throat. That colt had kicked everyone else, even me, but he let her lay a palm on his cheek like it was nothing. I leaned on the post and watched her for a long while. It hit me then. She wasn't a guest anymore. She was the rhythm of the place. But just when a man thinks he's found something solid, the past comes looking. It started with a letter. No name on the front. Just the county seal and a return address in Abilene. I opened it slow. Inside were 4 lines, typed neat. The man who sold the girl never faced charges. He's out. He's coming north. We thought you want to know. A friend. There was no signature. I read it twice. Then a third time. Cora found me standing there, the paper limp in my hand. She looked at it, then looked at me, and I didn't have to say a word. Her face didn't change, but her shoulders tensed like a violin string. That night, I bolted every door and oiled the rifle. I told myself it was probably nothing, just gossip, just wind. But I kept one ear open all through the dark. 2 days later, he arrived. No fanfare, no warning. Just rode up the hill on a gray mule with a saddle too nice for his stink. His name was Amos Clegg, and even from a distance, I could tell he carried the same disease that made men rot from the inside out. He dismounted slow, like the ground owed him something. "You got something of mine," he said, smiling like a man who thought that counted for charm. Cora stood behind me on the porch, her hands balled into fists. I didn't need to ask how she felt. I could feel it in the space between us. "She ain't yours," I said. "Paid for her, didn't I?" He grinned. "Told the law she was my niece. Never got around to proving it, but hell, blood's a funny thing. You sell family for whiskey? Depends on the bottle." I stepped off the porch slow. My boots hit the dirt with weight. "You've got 10 seconds to turn around and ride out of this valley." He snorted. "Or what?" Cora stepped past me, quiet as smoke. and held out her sketchbook. Flipped to a page. It was a drawing of him, his face twisted in a cruel sneer, with flames behind him, just like before. But this time, the man wasn't holding a child. He was alone, burning. Amos saw it. His smile died. She flipped to the next page. A noose, rough, thick, swinging from a cottonwood branch. Then the last page. A house. Ours. Safe. With light in the windows. She held his gaze. Unshaken. Amos took a step back. I see, he muttered. Got yourself a real little poet out here. She speaks now, I said. He laughed a sharp, ugly bark. This ain't over, cowboy. But his eyes were darting now, flicking from the rifle by the door to the axe and the stump to the strength in the girl's stance. He turned, spat in the dirt, and mounted up. As he rode off, I didn't lower my hand from the holster. Not until the dust trailed thin and the only sound left was the wind in the grass. We didn't talk that night. There wasn't anything to say. Some things are too close to the bone. But the next morning, Cora left a fresh page on the kitchen table. Just one word written bold and dark. Ours. That was all. I looked out the window. The sun had cleared the ridge, pouring gold over the paddocks. The world felt quieter. Not because the danger had passed, but because we knew now we'd stand when it came. We went about our day, mended the fence, watered the beans, mucked the stalls. The ordinary things. But it all felt different, like every small act was another nail in the roof of something we'd built together. That evening, as we watched the sky turn the color of rust, Cora leaned her head against my shoulder. No words, just the weight of trust. I thought about May then, about how I'd once believed my story ended the day I buried her. But now I knew better. Sometimes the world breaks you wide open, not to finish you, but to let something new in, something fierce, something worth fighting for. Cora wasn't just some girl I'd saved. She was the reason I was still here. And this ranch? This battered, wind-bitten piece of earth? It was ours.